We are waiting to see how the vote for keeping the government open is going to go. Currently, there is negotiations going on between Democratic leadership and Republican leadership in the Senate on whether or not there is going to be a shutdown, because Democrats want to see reforms within DHS. That they've passed a sortie of different spending bills, and the DHS spending bill is the last one. But with everything that DHS has said recently that has been proven lies, with the way that ICE has behaved, with the amount of high-profile shootings, a lot of Democrats are not comfortable giving them the 60 votes they need in the Senate in order to put this legislation through. But because of how tight these windows for negotiation are, as we always seem to run out the clock, if they don't pass a new bill, or even the bill that they've been talking about passing by this Saturday, then the government's going to shut down. Now, the reason why I think that the government is going to shut down, I do think that's the most likely outcome, is number one, the demands that are being requested, and number two, just where the legislators physically are at this moment. So the first problem is that the legislators in question are not in the House. While they might be able to come to some agreement in the Senate, House leadership, which has already passed these pieces of legislation and don't want to renegotiate them as they were passed together, and that would mean, a lot of paperwork, a lot of work. They don't want to do that. They like the bills how they are, House Republican leadership, and it would mean that the legislation would have to go back down to the House. And most importantly, to Republican leadership, or at least this is probably the thing that is allowing them to kind of avoid more pressure than they otherwise would have, is the fact that the House is not currently in session. That doesn't mean that they can't do it. Mike Johnson can call the House back into session, have a special session, have everybody come together to try to avoid a shutdown with a piece of compromise legislation. That is something he can do. That would just mean he would have to do his job. So if you want to place your bets at the blackjack table on that, please line up in chat, okay? Please do line up in chat. So that's the first problem, that they're literally not in session, and so they're not going to come into session until after the deadline passes, which that's one of the reasons why I think a shutdown is very, 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 very likely. I think almost certain now. The second reason is the requests made by Democrats. Now, in any other administration, these requests seem very milquetoast. In fact, in other administrations, they wouldn't even be requests. They would be things that would already be the letter of the law. And so you can see the tone and tenor and where exactly we're conversating. You can see it shifting by where the administration pushes. You push as far as possible, then instead of us debating policies in the center, we're debating policies on the right to get away from the far right. Listen to this. The demands may include, and they don't have a concrete list of demands yet given, and that's another reason why, because of how slow they've been, that I think that's not going to happen. Those include, these possible demands, requiring judicial warrants for arrests. That's just the law. In fact, that's DHS policy. Let me read you from DHS's own legal training manual issued last year during the Trump administration by their Office of Chief Counsel. It states, and I quote, "The physical entry of homes is the chief evil against which the wording of the Fourth Amendment is directed. Welsh v. Wisconsin, 466 U.S. 740, 1984. For that reason, entering a home to arrest a person without a judicial warrant or an exception to the warrant requirement is typically a violation of the Fourth Amendment, regardless of whether the officer has probable cause to arrest the suspect. An officer who enters a person home to make an arrest must have 1, a warrant, 2, consent, or 3, an exigent circumstance, i.e. gunfire is coming out of the house or something, something where you don't have a choice." So what they're demanding, quote unquote, is for them to follow DHS's own legal training manual issued during Trump's second term. Okay? Does that mean they shouldn't demand it? No, they should demand it. I think the fact that the administration is trying to argue and is telling ICE officers an administrative warrant is basically works the same, even though an administration warrant is one ICE officer writing a warrant for another ICE officer, somebody who cannot be impartial, being put in the job of an impartial arbiter. It doesn't make any sense. That's why you would have a judicial system. That's why you have the magistrate, because they are supposed to be impartial, while the ICE officers have quotas. And if they're meant to hit quotas, they're going to approve warrants in a way that is beneficial towards them hitting their quotas, especially when you got somebody like Kristi Noem or Stephen Miller or even the more moderates in the Trump administration breathing down your neck. So that's the first one. I think they should demand it, but I'm just being blunt with you guys about exactly where the conversation is in the country right now, right? Number 2, mandating federal agents have to identify themselves. God, dog. Hey, when the agent splits up the family, can they not be masked up? I mean, I've seen agents wearing like Halloween masks. Imagine somebody deports your family wearing Chucky masks and like Scream masks. Just whatever necessary to not identify them. So they will identify you. Oh no, they're not only going to identify you, they're going to know your name, they're going to know your face, they're going to know your address, they're going to know the entirety of your legal history, any interactions, any speeding tickets, anything you've ever done that has been documented by the government. They're going to have access to all of that. But that person arresting your family member, you can't even know their goddamn name. You can't know what their face looks like, because it's for the safety of the officers. The safety of the officers, of course. See, those fighting in Afghanistan didn't have to obscure their face. Those fighting in Normandy didn't have to obscure their face. You know, police officers that fought against the mafia didn't have to obscure their face. But no, these people, these ICE officers, are in a special sort of danger. A special sort of danger. The danger of scrutiny, the danger of shame, the danger of not being welcomed at the community barbecues once people realize exactly what you do for a living. Those seems to be the dangers. Next, ending arrest quotas. Think that makes sense? I think that makes sense from the Democrats' point of view, that the problem is right now, if you have officers approving the warrants of other officers while also having high quotas, then they're going to act in a way that might, bend the rules of the Constitution in favor of them making a quota. It should be based upon somebody, violating the law, being a threat to the community. It should be based upon factors that prioritize the local community, not hitting an arbitrary number. And I hate the arbitrary number as a concept, period. I don't want to just apply it to this. When I hear we need to hit 5% NATO spending, I roll my eyes. It's not about hitting 5%, 6%, 7%. You could hit 8%, but if you spend your money poorly and you spend it by building factories in an area that is most politically beneficial, but is going to cost you a lot more, and there's much more regulation, it's going to take you years to build. You've got all these local constituencies that are going to have their say. You got to look at like the local whooping crane species before you can build up the artillery factory. All of that is going to get in the way. And so coordinating at scale with European partners to concentrate this production where it'd be cheapest, where it'd be quickest, where it'd be most efficient, and where it could, be accessing the resources that directly go into production, that makes more sense. And not about hitting an arbitrary number of 5%, 6%, 7%. At a certain amount, you might be burning your money. You got to be able to produce at scale. And so when I hear about, an arrest quota like this, shouldn't it be focused on trying to get the worst of the worst? Because that's what Trump said. If you're focused on a quota of getting as many as possible, then guess what you're going to focus on? You're going to focus on the people who don't know no better. The people who, don't conceal their identity. The people who are not even necessarily dangerous. They're not carrying guns. They don't necessarily have a criminal record. They're hanging outside in public. The people who are easy are going to be the people you get. And so the real threats that carry guns in the middle of the night and go, kidnap people, go rape people, go murder people, well, that's a lot harder. The people who have been getting away from murders and rapes and all these types of things for years, they're going to be much better at hiding than Joe Schmo construction worker who, like, their fleeing instincts only really kick in once they see the ICE agents charging into the construction site, These arbitrary numbers should be less of a focus than getting the worst of the worst. Sending agents back to the border and forcing DHS to cooperate with state and local authorities in investigations into any incidents, such as the 2 shooting deaths in Minnesota. So this would mean CBP, like Customs and Border Patrol, would go back the border. Obviously, with Bovino being in Minneapolis, their presence in the city has been pretty high profile, as well as cooperation with local officials when it comes to investigations. Physical evidence has not been turned over to state investigators. Traditionally, when it comes to murders and different horrible crimes like this, the way it works is the federal government coordinates with the state government so that they can pool their resources, they can pool their sources, they can both look at the same piece of evidence from different perspectives with different connections in the community, because obviously the local police are going to have a better like on the ground perspective than the federal agents that have just been sent from DC, but the federal agent from DC might have a lot more resources, and so you work together to get to the end state. And by doing that, not only do you have a better investigation, but it also means more transparency, meaning that both DC is confident because they can see through their own investigation what happened, but also local officials and the local community is confident because they can see from their local officials and from the local report. That's at least the ideal, right? If you were trying to design this in a idiot's guide to bureaucracy, right? Instead, the federal government has blocked the turning over of any physical evidence in the case of the Renee Good shooting. After Renee Good was shot multiple times in the head, the whole nation saw that video, and many were disgusted and wanted answers. They said they would not reveal the identity of the officer, that they had not taken the officer off the job. And so while they might be taking the 2 officers off the job in the other case, in the case of the shooting of Alex Peretti, they did not do that in the case of Renee Good. And they are not handing over any evidence that they have. They're essentially conducting their own investigation. DHS is investigating DHS when it comes to the Alex Peretti shooting. When it comes to the Renee Good shooting, the investigation that they did launch was into Renee Good's wife. It was not into the officer themselves. They investigated the person who died, not the officer. And in the way that the government has framed it in both cases, both in the Renee Good shooting and the Alex Peretti shooting, has been that the officers were the victims, not the people who were shot and killed. So I do think that getting them to cooperate with local investigations is good. But again, listen to these demands again. Coordinate with the local investigation. Require judicial warrants. Mandate federal agents identify themselves. Or ending arrest quotas on immigration enforcement. Like this is not radical. This is what would typically be the state of affairs under previous Republican and Democrat presidents. But because of how the conversation has shifted, now the government is having a chance of shutdown over threats about whether or not the officers in your community need to identify themselves when they point guns at you. The demands are more just trying to agree on what the law is. Yeah, it seems to be trying to reinforce that we all acknowledge that we have these civil liberties, we have these laws, and that we are guided by a judicial system.